Hello everyone and welcome back to Autobot Dawson Gaming. Today we are going to make a tier list of all of the Transformers video games that I have played, which is pretty much all of the home console releases that I've streamed here on the channel over the last few years. You can check out any of these on there. But basically every Western home console release, right, is on here. And I don't want to include like mobile games or stuff I couldn't stream, so like animated on DS, for example, won't be included. But there is one mobile game I want to include, and that is Forged to Fight, only because I feel like it's worthy of being on this list. It's actually better than some of these games here. So nonetheless, let's get started with our tier list. We have S, A, B, C, and D, easy to follow. And simple to do here. So let's just get started with the newest Transformers game, Transformers Earthspark Expedition. Okay. I'm going to be placing this game in C tier. Now, I played the Nintendo Switch version and it was riddled with problems at launch. They did fix them pretty quickly, a couple weeks. But the game itself, not even factoring in the technical issues, it's a fine game for what it is. It's a tie-in game for Earthspark. It's definitely meant for kids, which is totally fine, and I'm sure kids would really enjoy it. But in terms of what we expect from games these days, it was lacking kind of the substance or charm of a lot of the other Transformers games. It was fun enough. It was a decent little story, but only being able to play as Bumblebee, definitely a bit of a letdown. When we want to... Part of what makes some of these other Transformers games so great is the variety of characters you can play as and sort of the different gameplay they bring to the table. And it was very typical, like capture outposts and stuff like that. But it was pretty fun to explore, and there were some fun little mini games and stuff like that. And also, the final boss, no spoilers, was quite the twist. And that actually was the best part of the game, was the final boss fight. And so I left actually liking the game more than when I started, which was great. So we're going to be placing that in C tier right now. And for the record, I'm a huge Transformers fan. I enjoyed all these games for the most part, with the exception of one, which I'm going to rank next. So I'm not going to be using like D tier very much, just because I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be super negative, but there is one game that's going to go in D tier, and that is Beast Wars on the PlayStation 1. I was really disappointed by this in every way. I didn't know this game existed until this year, and so when I set out on my quest to stream all of the, main Transformers video games, I was really looking forward to this one. And it just was almost unplayable for me personally. The shooting feels absolutely horrible. You can tell it was made for the computer and not for the PlayStation. The port was horrible. Maybe it's better on the computer. I don't know. The game was very dark and hard to see. It was kind of pointless. Like, the story didn't really matter what you did. Like, you kind of got the same outcome. And like, when it came to the gameplay itself, again, I mentioned how the shooting feels terrible, but also the whole gameplay is aimless. Like, they don't really tell you what you're supposed to be doing. You don't really get any hints on what you're supposed to be doing. You kind of just walk around a level shooting random stuff until like randomly you seem to get a mission complete. It could be from touching buttons or fighting a boss or whatever. The boss fights are nothing special. They're just like normal enemies with more health. And, overall, this one was a miss. It's the only one I didn't finish on this whole list. I just could not get through it because it was just not fun to play at all. So that is kind of the main reason I'm putting it in D tier, honestly, is because it was so unenjoyable that I couldn't even get through it. I couldn't even play it all the way through, and that's disappointing to say the least. So sticking with the Beast era, we have Beast Wars Transmetals. Now, I played the Nintendo 64 version. This is a fighting game, and it's not going to go in D tier, but it is going to go in C tier. I don't know. This game probably deserves to be in D tier, honestly, because like as a fighting game, it's so easy to just stun lock your opponent that it completely makes it uninteresting. It's also really easy for them to do it to you and get really frustrated. But I recognize this game for what it was. It was a Blockbuster exclusive, so it was meant to be rented and played in like 30-minute intervals. Like the arcade story is super short, but it's a charming little game. It's got fun little secrets, like you can unlock Tigatron. You can, you can play as Ravage. It's got these other fun little secrets, like if you get through the arcade mode without losing a round, you get to fight Megatron X, which was kind of fun. And, it's kind of cool because, like, when you fire up the game, it's made by Genasia, and Megatron goes, Genasia, yes. And so it's, like, in that perfect Beast Wars voice. And so I enjoyed this one a lot more than the PS1 Beast Wars game. I get it. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty abysmal for a fighting game, to be honest, but it's fun. And they at least had a cool concept where you could switch between Beast mode, Robot mode, but then also kind of this vehicle mode, they called it, where you were like sort of unable to, where you just kind of were moving really fast. So it's kind of like 3 different transformations, which was fun. I thought the game was cool for what it was. I enjoyed it. All right. Now, we've got Transformers. Let's see, who do we want to do next? Battlegrounds. And that is going in B tier for me. So this one was actually developed by the same people who made Earthspark Expedition, but I enjoyed it a lot more. This is the Cyberverse tie-in game and was my first exposure to Cyberverse. And I actually got to interview the voice of Grimlock, who I thought Grimlock in this universe was an amazing character. This is an RTS game. I don't usually like RTS games at all, so if you like an RTS game, you may rank this higher. But I really enjoyed this one. It was approachable. It wasn't so mechanics driven. It was, it was easy to pick up as someone who doesn't play RTS very much. And it was engaging. Seeing the way that they utilized the transformations and the different powers of the different Transformer characters in an RTS setting was a lot of fun. And I felt like it had very satisfying story moments as well. And fun dialogue. It was great. It didn't overstay its welcome. I really enjoyed this one. Definitely a solid spot in B tier. Next, we're going to do Transformers Rise of the Darkspark. Okay, now this is a controversial one, and I know that a lot of people really hate this game. Like, really hate it. And that's because they think of it as a sequel to Fall of Cybertron and War for Cybertron, which I know kind of technically it is, but it's not developed by High Moon Studios, even though High Moon Studios assets are used. And in the context of a Transformers game tier list with what we have in C tier, I have to place this game in B tier. Okay? Here's the thing. Darkspark as a sequel to War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron is pretty bad. But on its own, especially when you factor in the craziness that it was trying to achieve, which was connecting Age of Extinction somehow to the Cybertron games, it did okay. The story had some cool moments. Getting to see the Fall Cybertron design Optimus use the Matrix against Megatron's Darkspark was really cool. I loved the mission where you were Optimus teamed up with Jazz, and that's personal bias because Jazz and Optimus are my favorite Autobots, so it was really cool to see them, just them two alone in a whole team-up chapter, storming the Decepticon Citadel. It was really awesome. That was the highlight of the game for me. And also the Grimlock mission, playing as the sort of Age of Extinction looking Grimlock, you felt very powerful, very devastating. It was a lot of fun. So this game does have moments. Obviously where it struggles is its story being coherent, and that's unfortunate. The gameplay is quite fun, and I have to give some props to the escalation mode because it actually kind of takes a lot of what works from War and Fall's escalation. It lets you pick maps. It lets you choose your character out of a bigger list, like in War. But you also have these like pre-made loadouts, which at times can make the escalation a little too easy, but it is also fun to be able to customize in that way. It does not have online PvP. But it did have escalation when the servers were up, and, I gotta say, I had fun streaming Darkspark. Chat was awesome during this stream, so maybe I'm just having a better memory of it. But there were some cool lore drops in there, and I felt like it was a fun time, even if all of the facts kind of surrounding the game are unfortunate. So it's going to be B tier for me. Transformers Cybertron Adventures. Another C tier entry. Now, this one was a rail shooter and a tie-in, sort of a Wii version of War for Cybertron. I mean, you know, it is what it is. It feels more like an arcade game than an actual, like, full-blown console game. But for what it was kind of fun. You can play 2-player, which is kind of neat. And you did get a little bit of additional War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron lore, which is always welcomed by me. And so, you know, at the end of the day, it's a fun little game. It's not a great, fantastic video game. But I didn't really run into too many problems playing it, contrary to what I've seen online. So at least for me, still a C tier. I would still play it again. Okay. Let's hit up Transformers Devastation, which I'm going to put in A tier, our first A tier entry. This G1 inspired game is full of chaos and power and smooth combat. It was a blast to play through this. You can choose between Optimus, Sideswipe, Grimlock, Wheeljack, or Bumblebee as your playable character. And they all feel pretty cool. They all feel pretty unique. They have their unique combos and abilities. The gear progression was fine. The story was pretty awesome. It very much felt like an arc of G1, like a classic. This is Transformers, like 100%. It definitely felt that way. The cel-shaded art style looks great. Look, Platinum Games makes great games. That they're the makers of Bayonetta. They have this gameplay style down pat. The timing feels great. There's definitely a lot of difficulty to this game with the timing, especially when you rank up that difficulty, and you do fights like Minosaur and Devastator at the same time, stuff like that. The final battle with Megatron in open space was nothing short of amazing. One of my favorite final bosses in any video game. It was super spectacular. The transformations were smooth, and the way they incorporated the vehicle mode again into the combat. So much of what makes a good Transformers game is how do they incorporate the fact that the characters can transform. And Devastation does it beautifully. Can't recommend this game enough. Definitely pick it up and play it if you haven't already. It's a fantastic video game. Now, let's hit up Transformers Dark of the Moon. This game is going to go in B tier as well. Now, Dark of the Moon... Oh, sorry about that. Dark of the Moon is... I'm referring to the main PS3/360 version. Again, High Moon Studios. This was after War, but before Fall of Cybertron. And it's great for a tie-in game. The campaign is short and sweet, but it does provide a lot of context to the Dark of the Moon movie. Kind of lets you know a little bit of what happens before, kind of how they found Shockwave and stuff like that. And while some of the levels drag on more than others, I'm looking at you, Megatron level. That could just be because I'm an Autobot at heart. And some of the boss fights were really awesome. The Starscream level, I have to say, was pretty incredible. The Driller Beast fight, pretty incredible. And the online PvP for Dark of the Moon, I spent a lot of time on as a kid. It was a lot of fun. I remember it being really, really fun. Each character felt quite different. Each class felt quite different. And it was just a great overall PvP experience. Dark of the Moon definitely has its place here in B tier. Now, let's talk about Transformers Armada, the 2004 video game tie-in. Boom, it's also going to be going in A tier. Transformers Armada, ladies and gentlemen. This game is phenomenal. I would say out of this whole list, this is probably the most hidden gem of them all. This or maybe TF Prime. Spoiler alert on, that. But those two games in particular are hidden gems that don't really get talked about enough that are actually fantastic video games. Now, this Melbourne house-developed Transformers game here based on Armada universe is a fantastic PlayStation 2 game. Really feels like you're playing with the toys. You can play as Optimus, Hotshot, or Red Alert. On Commander difficulty, which is what I streamed it on, this game is insanely difficult. It has some really difficult moments, but it's not frustrating. It's very rewarding. The exploration is great. You have a lot of these little open world zones that you can explore, like the Amazon, the Arctic. There's like a ship that you can explore, all kinds of different zones. Each one has a really interesting boss at the end. You fight things like Starscream, Megatron. One of the most interesting ones is the tidal wave boss fight, where you're actually on an aircraft carrier for a whole level, and then you get through the level, and next thing you know, the level itself transforms, right, into the boss fight, which is really awesome. You're just staring up at this huge tidal wave. And the best part about the game, without a doubt, is the mini-cons. The way they incorporate the mini-cons I actually like better than the way that they do it in the show, to be honest. They take the mini-cons, and as you collect them, and by the way, in Commander difficulty, you have to find all 40 mini-cons to unlock the final boss fight, which I thought was a nice touch. Kind of forces you to be a completionist in a way, which was really interesting. You don't see that much in games. But finding the mini-cons was all really fun. And each one has a different color and a different sort of ability. Okay, they change your weapons. So there's a lot of different loadout combinations you can do. This is a highly personalized experience in this game. You can find your playstyle. There's everything from huge blasters to shock cannons to grenade launchers to gliders that are mini-cons, or even X-ray vision mini-cons. There's all kinds. You can customize those, and if you match up the color of multiple mini-cons, you get a health boost for doing that. So there's kind of a lot of smarts and different build crafting actually going in. And for a game that's just meant to be a tie-in game on the PS2, the developers really had a lot of passion for the brand, and you can tell they wanted this to be a definitive Transformers game. And at the time this released, this would have easily been the best Transformers game of all time. Are you kidding me? All the way back in 2004? It was leagues above anything that came before it, and for years, everything that came after it. So, hats off to the Transformers Armada game. Absolutely brilliant. Now, I want to talk about the movie tie-in games for the next two. The other two. Revenge of the Fallen, we are going to be putting in B tier. I played the PS2 version, but I have played the PS3 version as well when I was younger, and I liked both versions. Both I felt like had better characterization of the Fallen than the movie did, and better characterization of Jetfire than the movie did. And so, thus, I enjoyed these games more than the movie Revenge of the Fallen. They had some genuinely great moments. Really, really liked the boss fights with Demolisher and Devastator especially, but also the Egyptian set pieces and stuff like that. It kept the campaign engaging, and the PS3 version had some great PvP online gameplay as well. So I really can't say enough about how strong the campaign aspect of Revenge of the Fallen was. It really carried the game in a lot of ways. Whereas Dark of the Moon for me was carried by its PvP, Revenge of the Fallen was more carried by its campaign. And that brings me to Transformers the game, the '07 movie tie-in, and I am actually going to place it in B tier as well. I almost put this in A tier when I was contemplating. Almost, but it's not quite as good as some of these others. I know for a lot of people this may be the worst story of the three movie tie-in games, but for me personally, this was my introduction to the franchise. I was a kid in '07, and I actually got this video game, and that was my first exposure to the series. So I owe it a lot because I wouldn't be such a big Transformers fan without it. The gameplay really carries here. Okay, the story is fine. Some people like it better than the movie story, some people don't. It's similar to the movie story, but with a few key differences. More importantly, though, is that gameplay. Okay, you've got melee and you've got gun. Your standard Transformers stuff, but each of the maps, okay, is sort of a free roam. You've got like the suburbs, you've got the Hoover Dam, you've got the big city at the end, and all of them can be explored freely in between missions. You can climb buildings, you can pick up, giant store signs and lampposts, use them in combat. You can run away from the police, you can fight the Decepticons. There's also an Autobot and a Decepticon campaign. And there's these fun little cheat codes that allow you to get G1 paint jobs on the movie designs, which I actually have the toy of. The G1 Jazz on the movie design looks great. Speaking of Jazz, this game is why I love Jazz so much, because playing through the game as a kid, there's a level where Jazz gets the true respect he deserves as the Autobot second in command, arguably, and he fights Starscream and Blackout at the same time, takes them both out. And I just remember that mission being so cool. I really, really loved it. It felt like it was just a lot of fun. And when you complete the campaign for either faction, you also get a bonus Cybertron level where you fight off waves of enemies. So this game was more than meets the eye in a lot of ways. It's a fun game to check out. Go check it out if you can. The PS3 version especially, it's a really early PS3 title, and it's on PS2. It was a lot of fun. It's a fun little game, and you can get through the campaign really fast, but you'll find yourself, if you just let yourself go crazy and sort of treat the open world areas, like the little open areas that you get, as kind of a little sandbox to play around with as a Transformer, you'll really start to have a blast. It's like Need for Speed Carbon, or like some of the old Need for Speed games where you just drive around causing havoc. You can do that in this game, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, now, Transformers Prime the game, as alluded to earlier, is going in A tier. This campaign this is released on Wii and Wii U, by the way. I love Transformers Prime the show, and this game was a fantastic addition to that mythos. Original villain Thunderwing as a Herald of Unicron was a great main villain. The campaign has a really tight, well put together story that incorporates all the characters of Prime that you know and love in the best way possible. A lot of heart, and a lot of mission variety. You know, there were some missions where you were exploring, like, through these, like, almost dungeon areas with, like, puzzles. On the Decepticon ship, there were levels where you were racing away from a target, like a speed trial. There were levels where you were just brawling waves of Decepticons. A lot of variety. The boss fights are a lot of fun because this is kind of a brawler in a way. The use of the Wii remote on the Wii version was really fantastic. You use the motion controls to do your basic attacks, but then the buttons provide combos, shielding, transformations. There's an in-depth combat system here that really lends itself to the replayability of the game. And speaking of replayability, after the very satisfying end to the campaign, you can also now have a bunch of other characters unlocked for the multiplayer fighting game mode, which is so good. I've actually streamed just that multiplayer fighting game mode as well with my cousin a couple times, and you got to check those out because they're a blast. This multiplayer mode is so much fun. It's like a full-blown fighting game hidden inside this game, and it is a blast to play through, a lot of fun, and pretty well designed. I can't recommend this enough. It is a fantastic entry to the Transformers universe, and again, that campaign is just fantastic. Still to this day, my most watched live stream was the full playthrough of the campaign, and that's because it just hooks you. It's really great, and especially for a tie-in game, it really stood out. Okay, now again, I mentioned I'm not going to talk about the mobile games too much. I'm not even going to put Earth Wars on here because I haven't played it enough. But Forged to Fight, particularly the Netflix version, which has no microtransactions, is a really great game, and I feel like it's worthy of being on this list. So I'm actually going to be placing it, considering it's a mobile game, it really could be justified as being A tier in my opinion. It's the best Transformers mobile game to ever exist, without a doubt. It's a really smooth playing fighting game, a lot of fun. It uses the vehicle modes well. There's a lot of character variety, and again, no microtransactions. Are you kidding me? That is unheard of in a mobile game. So thank you, Netflix, for doing that, I suppose. The story's relatively engaging as well. It's a cool twist, like New Quintessa. You don't see that used in the Transformers lore a lot. It's got Megatronus and Necrotronus and Nemesis Prime as the villains, and there's a lot of engaging aspects about this game. I know that it's not a home console game, but I didn't want to not mention the mobile games at all because there are so many for Transformers. So I'm just saying this is the best one, Forged to Fight. If you're going to put your time in one, put your time here. This is what the list would look like so far without it, but I do think it's worthy of being up there. And now we're left to our final two, which I kind of have to talk about together, don't I? And that is, I'm just kidding. We already know where these are going, right? War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, both on the top of the kingdom as the S tier games, and they are truly worthy of that. These are not just fantastic Transformers games. These are some of my favorite games of all time, period. War and Fall by High Moon Studios are a master class in a shooter campaign, shooter PvP, and a shooter horde mode with its escalation mode. They feel amazing. The story in both is so tight, so well designed. In War, you can even play through the campaign co-op, which is a blast. The boss fights are a blast, especially stuff like Triptychon. There's these huge set pieces, like you get the Metroplex heeds the call, the last prime moment in Fall of Cybertron. I mean, there is just not enough good stuff to say about these games. The escalation mode provides hours and hours of replayability alongside your friends. Wars is particularly brutal, and Falls, really you fall into a specific role, which provides a different experience than War's escalation in a great way. The PvP in both games was absolutely fantastic. Both had private matches where you could just play PvP with your friends. By the way, if you have a PS3 and you want to get back online on these two games, I have a video on the channel showing you how to do that. Just change your DNS settings a little, and you can still play these games online. But let me tell you, when they were in their heyday and the community was lively, absolutely incredible online experience. But even without the brilliant PvP and escalation modes, which I just cannot even explain how amazing they are so good. Countless hours synced in growing up into these with my friends. It's just a really one-of-a-kind experience. But the campaigns are worth it on their own. Get a copy of this game and play it on both of them. They are really, 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 really great stories. Having the Transformers games sort of show you the backstory of the Cybertronian War and throw you as the player into the heat of it with all the iconic characters and these just great looking Cybertronian designs are just amazing. To me, any time that any Transformers media talks about the Cybertronian War now, these are the stories and the designs that I immediately think of. I mean, it just is the backstory of the Transformers to me before they came to Earth. Like, these games perfectly tell it. And it's just so cool to get that story. Like, the War of Cybertron is like the center of what started the Transformers mythos, right? And it's just really, really awesome to see. Cannot recommend these two enough. They are really, really, really incredible games. Some of the best games ever made, in my opinion. And some fantastic shooter action. Seriously. Do yourself a favor, play War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron. Hats off to High Moon Studios for making the best two Transformers games of all time. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, this is Autobot Dawson Gaming, rolling out. Comment down below which of my tier list you disagree with and which you agree with, because I know there will be some discrepancies for some people. But I'm sure we can all agree on War and Fall being an S tier, right? I mean, come on. And by the way, be sure to give these three A tier games a chance if you haven't already, because trust me, you'll love them. Have a great day, everyone.